Come on in, take a seat. Welcome to Wednesday night. Tonight we're going to continue on in our Bible study of mental health and mental illness as it and how the church relates. So let's start off our night with the word and prayer. Heavenly Father, we want to give you praise and glory tonight as we can enter your house to worship you, Lord, to praise you, Lord, to study your word. Lord, I ask that as we study this about mental illness and how it was dealt with in the Bible, Lord, and that we as a church body can learn from this, Lord, to be a support to those who are suffering from the mental illnesses themselves, and also to a support to the families as well, Lord, because I know that sometimes with dealing with a mental illness, Lord, is just as rough on the family as it is on the individual. Lord, once again, I ask that if anyone out there is struggling with mental health issues, either here or out watching us on video, will reach out, Lord, and just ask for help. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. All right. Is that better? All right. So what we're going to talk about tonight is it's not really a mental illness per se, but it's a physical injury that could bring about mental health issues, and that is the traumatic brain injury. And once again, we're looking at from the material Grace for the Afflicted by Matthew S. Stanford. And so some of the symptoms. A traumatic brain injury, or a TBI, is an injury to the brain caused by some external physical force. TBIs most often result from a fall or blow to the head that does not penetrate the skull, a closed head injury. This type of injury may cause bruising or swelling of the brain's tissue, referred to as a concussion. Now, I've heard this, that everyone has some sort of a TBI. Most of it is pretty mild. If you bonked your head playing sports, or you were in an accident and you had a concussion, or whiplash and your head jarred back and forth where your brain made contact with your skull, inside your skull, that everyone has had some sort of TBI in the world, everyone. And again, it could be something as mild as just a mild concussion. Now, when an object that penetrates the skull, such as a bullet, it causes an open head injury. This type of TBI is more serious and often involves fractures of the skull and significant bleeding within the brain itself. So, two types of TBIs, a closed head injury, and then an open head injury. The open head injury, of course, is much more severe and causes much more problems. Now, common symptoms of a mild TBI include headaches, nausea, dizziness, difficulty in toleration of bright lights, fatigue, visual disturbances, memory loss, poor attention or concentration, sleep disturbances, irritability. Now, moderate to severe TBI can include any of the symptoms of mild TBI, as well as the following: repeated vomiting or nausea, seizures, dilation of one or both pupils of the eyes, clear fluids draining from the nose or ears, inability to awaken from sleep, weakness or numbness in the fingers and toes, loss of coordination, profound confusion, agitation, combativeness and other unusual behavior, slurred speech, and a coma. Now, you'll notice once again, with mental illness and with other types of injuries, a lot of the symptoms can kind of overlap. Kim? A brain aneurysm, again, it's more of a medical condition, and I think that a brain aneurysm can cause, brain damage. Oh yeah, yeah, and it can cause damage to the brain. As early as the diagnoses, as early as 500, 600 BC, Assyrian and Babylonian physicians understood that injuries to the head could cause seizures, paralysis, and loss of sight, hearing, or speech. Ambrose Paré, I don't know how I pronounce his name, a 16th century French military surgeon, is credited with being the first physician to use the term concussion in describing mild TBI. Now here's what happens when someone gets a TBI. Beyond the physical symptoms previously described, there are two significant concerns following a TBI. A deficit in cognitive functioning. Sometimes thinking is not as clear as it once was. Maybe there's a lot of confusion. Or a personality change. Now, at work, we do work with people who have TBI, who have some TBI. And TBI, if people have it, depending on the severity of it, the person, TBI is different from one person to another, depending on how severe it is. We had this one gentleman in our facility a couple years ago. He had a TBI. And there are some things that he just could not remember. When he would say, like, how old are your son? He had I think two sons. How old are your sons? Instead of telling us how old they were, he would say, well, one's this big, other one is this big. There was some information that he could not remember. He just totally forgot. Other people can have a total different personality change within how they act before the TBI and then afterwards. Has anyone here known anyone who has a TBI? Andrew, you know somebody? What have you noticed about that person? Sure. Yep. And I've seen that. I have seen that firsthand. Sometimes you can't remember things that you normally could. Person's personality might be totally has changed. And we're going to make a look at some risk factors. And these are not exhaustive. There's some other ones here. Usually, male gender, ethnic minority status, being 55 or over. So Pastor, myself, and all the guys in here just about gotta watch ourselves. You're in that range, yeah. Alcohol consumption. People under the influence of drugs or alcohol could are a greater risk. Falls are the leading cause of TBI, unintentional blunt force trauma, and motor vehicle accidents. So, many of you who are sports fans are aware that in the NFL, of course, what was the biggest concern? Too many concussions that these NFL players have taken. And studies have shown that players, it doesn't have to be in just football, but in sports in general, too many concussions could cause a lot of problems on down the line. And there were many people, football players, that their personality has changed. One person I could think of was a great football player at his day. He played for I think the Chargers, Junior Seau. Remember him? He had too many concussions, and he ended up, committing suicide because of that. Yeah. Exactly. And again, TBI affects people differently, but I think that there's some commonality in some of these injuries. Again, people in motor vehicle accidents, even if you, like Suri, I don't know, I mean, your accident the other day, did you have like whiplash or your head go back and forth at all? No. Yeah, the Lord protected you. That's no doubt about that. But even like in a whiplash, just when your head moves forward and back all of a sudden, cause your brain to shake within your side of your skull. That could cause a TBI. It could be a mild concussion, but nonetheless, it's a TBI. Go ahead, Sri. Yeah, you know what? This was years ago. They did a study. I think it came out of Finland, where what sport causes the most physical damage, and it was soccer because of that. Because in all the other sports, football, American football, baseball, hockey now, they all wear helmets, all wear protective gear. Where in soccer, they wear pads on their knees and shin pads, but their head, they don't wear no head covering on that. And hitting the ball with their head causes TBI. Now I can't remember the percentage or what, because I don't follow soccer or football as it's known around the world. I don't follow that. Oh yeah, that's what soccer is the #1 popular sport in the world. There's no doubt about it. Oh yeah, that's exactly what they're talking about. And so I don't know like what their studies are for those, like say those who played all their adult life, or not adult life, but from child on up, and what effects it has on the brain. I have no idea, but I'd imagine all that time, pounding hitting the ball with their heads could, over years, causes some sort of damage. Yeah. No, and yeah, yep. Yeah, so any type of like physical impact sport can cause TBI. I remember a few years ago, Justin Morneau, who used to play for the Twins, he hit the ball, and he was running into second base, and I think he hit his head on the other player's leg or foot or something, on his knee. And Justin Morneau had a concussion from that, a TBI, and for many months or years after that, he would have severe headaches. Yeah. Yeah. And so, sports athletes are in that type of category where they are a high risk for having TBIs. We brought the concussion. They have a concussion here and here and there, and all the time they lose something. Also, another big one, of course, is soldiers, people who are in combat. When you watch those commercials, how many see those commercials about veterans, about the like wounded warriors, and they show usually a veteran, and a lot of them have TBIs from being in combat, from getting blown up by IEDs. They lost not only that lost half their body, And some have lost limbs, arms and legs, but some.
But you figure that type of concussion or whatever, that deal, it's gonna go to your line.
Oh yeah,
It's gonna cause it.
and I've seen, examples on the commercials of people gone through a total personality change as before they got injured. A lot of them, like, for instance, they can't walk. I mean, they might have all their limbs, but because of a TBI, they don't know how to walk. They have to use a wheelchair or learn how to walk all over again.
The one that they have there was the father and son, and his damage or whatever was really bad and shattered. I mean, he talked about it shattered, on the other side,
Yeah,
that the brain, that's the only thing threatening, shattered.
yep, yep. And sometimes, people with a TBI, some of them have a personality change. They could, again, very simplified. I'll go back to almost like a child. Other people can get mean. Other people can, the bright lights can upset them, depending on the severity of it. Some of you know this, some of you don't, but my father, he was married before he met my mother, and his first wife had passed away. But while they were married, they had a son, my older half-brother. And something went wrong where he was left in his mother's womb too long. And he suffered some brain damage because of that. And he had a brain injury, and he was also very, very crippled. And my older brother, although he was an adult, still had some like childlike behavior. And he passed away not too long ago, about, I don't know, 7-8 years ago he passed away. But you can see how some of brain injury can affect people. And again, brain injury affects people differently. Again, according to how severe it is, how mild it is, how dangerous it is. I've seen people, through the grace of God, survive being shot in the head. I've seen that, and also seen where this one, I don't know if it was a construction worker or something, had a piece of, looked like rebar or something, a pipe through his head, and the person survived. And don't explain it. I can't explain it, but only that the grace of God goes there. So, again, when we look at some of the risk factors, as we get older, us guys that are over 55, we got to be careful out there. I don't know. I mean, be careful out there on the ice and the snow, because I know that as I get older, that I can't take the falls I used to do when I was younger. It takes longer to heal, a lot more to hurt. Yeah. So I don't know. I might consider walk-in tubs and those steer lift chairs on the stair. If you have stairs in your house, stair lift. Look into it. And so you never know. Again, things could also increase the risk. Again, playing a high-contact sport, drinking, using drugs can make you unsteady, and just not being careful. I mean, look, I don't ride motorcycles. And I'm glad Jesse's not here tonight. But Jesse, if you're watching, I don't know, motorcycles, I would wear a helmet. I mean, instead of going out there with that one. What's that? Yeah, it only does so much.
It protects the head somewhat, but if they lay their legs down and hit a vehicle or something like that, usually the helmet is fully open,
Yeah,
so is that.
sure.
Well,
And you've probably seen it too.
I've seen tons of it. Seen tons of it this morning, and I used to ride motorcycles back in the day too.
Do you wear a helmet?
Yeah,
Okay. Sure.
but the only thing that's gonna save you is if God can be with us. So, I mean, you can't predict what the other person's gonna do with God.
No, no, you don't.
Which is in no means meant to say that you can go on riding your motorcycle without helmet.
Yeah. Even though I think in Minnesota, you can do it without a helmet. And same way in Pennsylvania, you can do it without a helmet.
You don't see too many people in Minnesota that ride motorcycles.
Yeah, well, that's good. Surrey. Yeah. Yeah, I think there is. I'm no expert on the brain, but I think that the people, and I don't know how much I believe this or not, but there always has been this saying that the brain is, we only use like 10% of our brain functioning.
Brain is, because it's got different parts to do different things. You've got part of the brain that tells you, or not, part of the brain tells you about moving, part of the brain tells you through the heart to keep on beating. And so, it's your brain, if it was mechanical, would be a computer.
Yeah, so, but I think that our brain can, controls all our functions of our body. And so, yeah, I mean, yeah, I do believe that. And I also think as humans, like a computer, I don't know how, you can be an old computer, still have those floppy disks. And if the data's still there, you can bring it up. But sometimes our memories are faulty, through a lot of different reasons. Like, sometimes I wish that maybe, like, my mind was at a computer, like everything I did, I can just bring up and remember. But there are some things that I'm glad I don't remember. I don't know. What's that? Yeah. Yeah. And I think about it too. If you think about the brain, always fascinated me with like shows like, if you remember back when Leonard Nimoy used to do that show called In Search Of, and do about the mysteries of stuff. And just think about it. The people who built the pyramids, and how they were able to lift those huge blocks and without modern tools, and to figure that stuff out. And there were a lot of people, back then, that were fantastic astronomers. Now, unfortunately, a lot of them used it to worship the stars, but some of them developed math. And we here, we have a computer. Now, if you have a digital watch or even a calculator at home, that has more, computing power than the first UNIVAC and those computers that were like filled the size of a room because they were so big. It had those punch cards. You remember those, Howard? You were back then. Use those punch cards. And so the brain is amazing. Something that the scientists can't explain, because they can't explain that God created this. But when there's an injury to the brain, it could cause, malfunctions in ourself. Now, when we look to the Bible, there are 4 detailed examples that are in the Bible about brain injuries. So we'll take a look at each one of them, and we'll talk about it. The first one was a man named Sisera. He was a Canaanite general during the time of the Judges. And this is the guy that a tent peg was driven through his temple and into the ground. Remember that story? And it went through his head and into the ground underneath him. Now, he suffered a severe perforating brain injury, and he died very quickly. The second one was Abimelech. Now, Abimelech, he was Gideon's son. And you remember Gideon, God used him as a powerful judge, and he was threshing wheat in a wine press. Was that it? And he said, Gideon, you're going to be the hero over here. And Gideon was. But afterwards, Gideon had 70 sons. And his son Abimelech killed all his brothers and set himself up as the king of Israel. Now, during a battle, a woman threw a millstone from a tower, striking Abimelech in the head. Now, the wound or that injury did not kill him immediately. He was still living, and he realized that his wound was fatal. So he ordered his armor bearer to kill him, so that it may not be said that he was killed by a woman. So here, another brain injury, and from what the evidence was, that although he wasn't killed right away, he probably would have died from his injury. The third one was our friend Goliath. Goliath was killed by David slinging a stone, and it sunk into his forehead. Now, that wound probably would not have killed Goliath, but the next one did. And what did David do? You can't answer that. He took his I mean, no one can survive that, right? So with Goliath, the rock in the forehead, he probably would have survived, but not getting his head cut off. No one can come back from that one. Not even the headless horseman from Sleepy Hollow. And then the last one we're going to take a look at is Eutychus. Now, you all remember Eutychus. If you have your Bible, or you can put this up. Can you put this up, Liz? Acts 20, verses 7 through 12. I put her on the spot for this one. You can do it for home, for people that are on the thing there. There it is. On the first day of the week, we came together to break bread. Paul spoke to the people, and because he intended to leave the next day, he kept on talking until midnight. There were many lamps in the upstairs room where we were meeting. Seated in a window was a young man named Eutychus, who was sinking into a deep sleep as Paul talked on and on. When he was sound asleep, he fell to the ground from the 3rd story and was picked up dead. Paul went down, threw himself on the young man, and put his arms around him. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "He's alive." Then he went upstairs again and broke bread and ate. After talking until daylight, he left. People took the young man home alive and were greatly comforted. So now, in this passage here, which was, I think you put up the NIV, which I have here. So Eutychus fell from a 3rd story window, again, and I don't know how high those stories were. If the third story back then was equivalent of say an average third story window here, he fell out of it, and apparently the way that the text reads, when he hit the ground, he was instantly killed. And most likely, he had a lot of blunt force trauma. It could be to the head if he hit his head. It could have been, fractures of his body, his arms and legs, whatever. But he was dead. So he had a very traumatic blunt force trauma, and he died. And Paul went down to him, threw himself on the young man, and said, he's alive. So it gives you a lesson here is don't sit near an open window, especially if you're on a third floor. I got to tell you this story too. I mean, I'm not a fan of heights. So this was years ago. I worked at a travel agency, and we went to New York City. This was before 9/11, way before that. This was like maybe in the late 80s. So the Twin Towers were still there. And I had a chance to go up into that. And you got to this one floor where you can look out. They have like a glass. You can look out over. And even though they had glass completely inside, it's like, oh man, this is, I don't want to do this. And sometimes because the towers are so high, sometimes you can feel them sway a little bit. Yeah. So I'm not a fan of heights at all. And if you need me to clean out your gutters, you're calling the wrong person, because I'll never do it for any amount of money. Wouldn't do that. But then again, you see some of these old videos and old movie reels of skyscrapers back in the day, where maybe the beam they're walking on is 6 inches wide, and it's like, I don't know how many feet, 300 feet up in the air. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so as we kind of finish up for tonight, I know we're going to end a little bit early. A couple things here. Now, most of the biblical descriptions of TBI that's in the Bible tell us a little more than the opportunity to see the consequences of evil. Sisera, Abimelech, and Goliath were wicked men who attacked God's chosen people and who were punished for their actions. Now, this does not say this, that every time someone has a TBI, this is the result of God's judgment on you. TBIs can happen to anybody, especially, you're involved in an accident, you're involved in a motor vehicle accident, you fall at home, and you hit your head on something hard, get a TBI. Again, stuff happens, right? I mean, it's nothing that because we talk about this in the Bible where a tower fell. Stuff like that happens. Things are built by human hands, they fail. They fell. But having a TBI in itself does not mean someone is being punished by God. However, because someone may be sinning, doing something wrong, they could get an end result of a TBI. And especially, if Suri decides to rob a bank, and he gets in his brand new, his Venza he just got, and speeding out throughout the city, and he gets into an accident, God forbid, TBI, because of that sin, it's the consequences. But the examples of TBI here in the Bible, most of them are because of a result of sinful nature of those people. Now, their stories remind us that it's both a warning against sin and to remind us about the sovereignty of God. Things will happen here. Abimelech again, Sisera, what's his name? Sisera, Abimelech, and Goliath all thought that they were great in their own way. But God gave them chances, and they chose not to heed to maybe many warnings, and God paid them back for the sin that they did. Now, when Eutychus fell, it is clear that Paul stopped teaching and he went to him. And one thing that he did is that the entire group took a break to comfort the family of Eutychus. They stopped, they ate. After everything was okay, Paul went back to teaching until daybreak. So Paul had a lot to say. But one of the things is this. Paul and the early Christians understood that the most important thing to the heart of God at that moment was Eutychus and his family. So he took time out from his teaching to meet the need of what was going on there. A couple things that I want to bring up before we tend to move on from this is that brain disorders are messy things. They don't fit well into our rigid and highly structured churches. Sometimes we as people don't know how to respond to them. Sometimes people with a TBI, they're obvious. Others you probably wouldn't know until you would ask them personally. But because of that injury, it could cause changes in their personality, that they're no longer that way. So as Christians, we need to kind of realize that and choose to help and bring healing to the people instead of judging them and stuff. I mean, because a lot of times in churches, and again, growing up in a Pentecostal church, sometimes people can get on their holy high horse. And again, I'm not trying to excuse sinful behavior, but I think that as Christians, we can become aware of, okay, what's going on here? And how can we support and come alongside not only the people themselves, but people's families as well? Because I'm going to tell you something. One of the things that I've seen while working in the field that I work at is not only do people who have mental illness struggle with it themselves, but it also takes a toll on their families. Some of it is because maybe they don't understand what's going on. Others is that people are so much turmoil that they cause problems for their family. I'll give you an example of this. We have a client that a really nice guy when he's medicated, but when he's not medicated, he is diagnosed with bipolar disorder. We talked about bipolar disorder many weeks ago, and that's that sometimes they're very manic, a lot of high energy, a lot of intense emotions, and when someone's in that phase, like he's in now, he says things that are delusions. He thinks that he has a spaceship somewhere. He believes that he's a shaman. He believes he's Native American and African American, even though he is German-Irish mix. But he believes this stuff. And he's been tormenting his parents about getting money because his mother is his rep payee. She controls his money for him because if it was left to his own devices, he'd give that money away and spend it on stuff. He wants to spend it on bodyguards and just some delusional stuff. Now, we all know it's delusion, but to him, it's real. And this past Saturday, his father called me at work, just beside himself. What do we do? He's calling us. He's demanding all this money. If we give him some money, he'd blow it. And when he got to our place, he was given $400, and that was supposed to last him the entire month. He blew it in a couple days. But the point is, he has a mental illness. He's struggling. But it's also hard on his family as well, because they want to see him well. But he has a mental illness, plus he uses drugs. And that's a deadly combination right there. Because I see a lot of turmoil in that. So again, those of you at home, this is why I'm doing this series, because of COVID. We have seen at work, and I think a lot other places too, an increase in drug use, an increase in mental health symptoms. And we as a church, if we learn a little bit more about this, I think we can be a better support, not only to the people who are suffering, but the families as well. Anyone have any final comments before we close? All right then. We'll pick this up again next week, and